Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters, with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana News Desk, the escalating crisis in the Ukraine and the impact it's having on one family that's here visiting their children.
They say us we must change air tickets too late period, but of course we have business in Ukraine, we have home in Ukraine.
When will they be able to get home? What will they return to? And how is the situation different from what's being reported by American media? Hemp is an agricultural commodity which has been grown industrially throughout the world.
I believe over time it's probably going to be the largest job creator that we have seen in the state of Indiana for many, many years.
But it's illegal in Indiana. The push to change the regulations and how it could impact farmers who are suffering from shrinking tobacco profits. Plus, the legislative session is winding down. We go live to the statehouse for the latest on the big issues lawmakers are still debating. Those stories and a look at this week's headlines right now on Indiana News Desk. Hello, I'm Joe Wren, and welcome to Indiana News Desk. What started as peaceful protest in Ukraine months ago recently escalated to violence between the protesters and government officials. Dozens of people have been killed. Now Russia is moving into the country, making things complicated for many Ukrainians. Claire McInerney shares the story of one Ukrainian family stranded in Indiana because they're scared to return home.
Sergei Fasenko swims at least 2.5 miles every day. Lately, he's been doing it here in one of the pools at Indiana University. He mostly swims right now to help pass the time. He and his wife have been stranded in Bloomington for almost 2 months. What began as a long vacation to visit their sons has turned into an unimaginable situation.
Yesterday we calling to our parents. I calling to my mom, and she calling to her mom. They also is so worried. They both don't know what happened next morning.
When the Fasenkos left Kiev in mid-January, the protests over former President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to create strong ties with Russia rather than the European Union were still peaceful. 3 days after they arrived in the U.S., though, things turned violent. Dozens of people were killed, and Russian troops moved into the country. The conflict in their home country is complicated for Fasenko and his son, Sergei Jr. They identify as Ukrainians, but have strong ties to Russia. They have family there, and when Sergei Sr. won his gold medal, he was representing the former Soviet Union. 20 years later, when his son was in the Olympics, he swam for Ukraine. And the Fasenkos are representative of most Ukrainians today who have strong ties to both Russia and Ukraine.
So you should actually think of it as kind of a color spectrum. You know, if we imagine, if we want to do like an American electoral map, and we're going to paint one side blue and the other side red. Let's make the red side the Russian side, more Soviet, right? And the blue side, the Western side. Well, we'd have a large region in the middle, which is purple, and which has been shifting over the last 20 years.
Sergei Jr. originally came to Bloomington to swim for IU. He loves Ukraine and would like nothing more than to return there. But for now, he's decided to stay in Bloomington. He's a small business owner and lives a life he says he couldn't in Ukraine.
Ukraine is a country that, especially before now, if you don't have connections in the government, or if you don't know someone who is influential, you will not be able to succeed in business. It's going to be taken away from you, either law enforcement that is corrupt or by organized crime.
While visiting Kiev in December, Sergei Jr. participated in the protests. To him, the revolution, as he calls it, in ousting of former President Yanukovych, is creating a better Ukraine.
I can't feel fine. I can't feel happy before everything gets back to normal again. And I think this is what they call being a patriot of your own country, and really love your country. And you know, when country is sick, you don't feel good. It's just like your child.
The Fisenkos monitor the situation closely through Western media. Being in the U.S. actually gives them more information about what's going on because they're further away from the center of the conflict. Sergei Sr. and his wife plan to return to Kiev March 15th, but with the situation still uncertain, it's not an easy decision. Sergei Sr. says his sons are concerned.
They say, stay here, stay here. Why you must go to Ukraine now? Stay and wait and looking for the next 10, 20 days, what's happening. And then you realize your air ticket or you change your air ticket.
Now, as he said earlier, they're having a hard time getting plane tickets home. Earlier this week, U.S. Senator Dan Coats, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, proposed a list of sanctions to encourage Russia to withdraw from Crimea. The sanctions include expelling Russia from the G8, reducing U.S. presence in the country, and suspending Russian work visas. Senator Coats said in a statement Wednesday that the proposals are designed to isolate Russia and would inflict real pain on Putin and Russian interests. Senator Joe Donnelly supports these measures and condemned Russia's actions, saying, "I support Ukraine's sovereignty, and I believe we should continue working with our allies to address Russia's recent acts of aggression while promoting political and economic stability for the people of Ukraine." Now for headlines, we go over to Alex Dierkman, who has an update on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. President Obama estimates the federal government will need to pay insurance companies on the health exchange nearly $6 billion to make up for the profit losses they're seeing this year. Healthcare companies are expected to lose money this year because older people have been the first ones to sign up on the exchange, and they tend to have higher medical costs. Healthcare and Human Resources consultant Chris Schrader says that the losses could affect the number of insurance companies on Indiana's exchange.
Indiana does not have a robust market, quite frankly. You look at other states like Minnesota in particular, California, let's say, where I can honestly say that there's a true marketplace, broad selection, a number of competitors in there as underwriters. That's not Indiana.
And if insurance companies don't start making a profit in the next year or two, it's unlikely any additional ones will join the exchange. That means less competition and could mean higher premiums. The SAT is changing, and no one knows how Indiana's potential drop of Common Core education standards will affect how high schoolers perform on the college entry test. The test has been retooled to align with the nationally crafted Common Core expectations, but it's likely Indiana will become the first state to exit the initiative when the state board considers new standards later this year. SAT representatives have reassured Indiana lawmakers who want to leave the Common Core that the test will remain relevant to Hoosier students. The SAT changes will take effect with the 2016 edition of the exam. Indiana researchers are waiting to hear from the state Supreme Court on whether it will allow more cameras into courtrooms. The Hoosier State Press Association initiated a pilot program last year to show cameras have no negative effect on trial proceedings and provide greater access and transparency. But judges have long been concerned that witnesses can be put in danger by cameras. They also worry attorneys will try to sway public opinion and taint the outcome of the case. The Press Association maintains that by putting some management guidelines in place, these risks can be removed. The Senate has approved a bill setting boundaries on high-tech police surveillance. Legislators are also considering a bill to block police from using scanners to download information from your cell phone. But a second bill goes further, requiring police to get a warrant to use tracking devices, plant hidden cameras on private property, or use surveillance drones. The House will have to reapprove the bill because of a change made in the Senate to make clear it doesn't apply to ankle bracelets worn by released inmates on probation. Motorcyclists and bicyclists could legally run red lights on occasion under a bill headed to the governor. Many traffic lights operate on sensors which detect metal and turn the light green. But motorcycles and bikes don't have enough metal to sometimes trigger the lights, leaving them waiting at an intersection until a car comes along to trip the sensors. The bill would let bikers go through the red light if they've been sitting there for 2 minutes and there's no traffic coming. Restaurants looking to move into downtown Bloomington could face tougher scrutiny. The City Council approved an ordinance this week that increases the level of scrutiny chain establishments could face if moving into the city's downtown area. The resolution is a scaled-back version of the initial proposal that completely restricted standardized establishments. During public comment, many questioned the resolution's legality, fairness, and economic impact. The Planning Commission will start crafting the ordinance at its meeting next week. $4 million. That's how much the National Park Service is estimating the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore and the businesses surrounding it lost because of last year's government shutdown. The 16-day shutdown closed the National Lakeshore and most other national parks throughout the U.S. last October. Lakeshore saw fewer than half the visitors in October than it typically does. Governor Mike Pence honored Nick Gepper this week, the state's sole competitor in the 2014 Winter Olympics. Gepper, a native of Lawrenceburg, Indiana, won a bronze medal last month in the ski slopestyle competition behind two of his American teammates.
Every Hoosier was standing a little bit taller when we saw you on that stand.
The House of Representatives also passed a resolution praising Gepper for his achievement and voted last month to exempt Olympic prize money and medals from state taxes. Gepper so far is the only one to whom that law applies. And a Southern Indiana amusement park is planning new changes this season. Holiday World and Splash and Safari and Santa Claus has hired a St. Louis company to lead multiple projects, including the addition of a safari-based restaurant and shop, as well as a newly designed Christmas area. Joe.
Oh, that looks like a lot of fun, doesn't it?
It does.
Thanks, Alex. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana's next cash crop? Why some people are saying hemp could be a boon for Indiana's economy. Our statehouse reporter is standing by to give us an update on several key pieces of legislation as the session starts to wrap up. And we sit down with Greencastle Mayor Sue Murray to talk about changes coming to the area's community college. Those stories right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Nature takes you places where you've never gone before.
It's watching something that's actually happened.
Nature sure drew me in the story.
Just their power and their grace.
You know, it was just so beautiful to watch them.
The movement and just watching the body and watching the chase. Like this huge, lush, vibrant watercolor.
Gems.
There was such a shot of underneath watching these elephants swim in this deep water.
I had no idea even they could swim like that. I saw that one monkey pulling on this one monkey's tail, and the monkey like, man, what you doing? What you doing?
It's like the theater of the wild or something.
7 billion trillion animals living on one planet.
It's like more colorful than than you think life can possibly be.
Somewhere between the mystique and the beauty of it is reason enough to sit down and watch.
That's life. And that's nature.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. A bill that's headed toward becoming law in Indiana legalizes the production of industrial hemp. It's a plant that is likely best known for being related to marijuana, but it doesn't include hallucination properties. Hemp advocates say it could be an economic boon to the state, but as Gretchen Frazee reports, there are still some roadblocks to hemp becoming a local commodity.
Bob Backus has grown tobacco most of his life, but it's not as accepted as it was 60 years ago.
There are obviously health implications with tobacco. I think most of us admit that. There's a certain amount of political correctness in a lot of aspects of the world today.
The changing public opinion, combined with high labor costs and a changing global market, has put a dent in tobacco production. Tobacco farmers in the U.S. made a combined $3 billion in the early 1990s. In 2012, they made only half that.
We're always open to other options, other alternatives.
So far, Backus has tried several measures, including cutting back on the number of people he hires and planting radishes in the off-season to help revitalize the soil so he doesn't have to buy as much fertilizer. But the continuing decline in the market is making him seriously think about giving up on tobacco altogether and switching to a crop that in most states is banned, hemp. In 1937, the federal government made growing hemp illegal except in special cases. It was part of a national effort to crack down on its hallucinogenic cousin, marijuana. But unlike marijuana, hemp was used in a wide variety of products, from biofuels and paper to clothing and plastic car parts. It was so versatile, in fact, that during World War II, the U.S. actually encouraged people to grow hemp as a way to support the war effort.
A dense and shady crop, hemp tends to choke out weeds. Here's a Canada thistle that couldn't stand the competition.
Hemp was completely banned in the 1970s as a part of the Controlled Substances Act, but some hemp advocates maintain the original crackdown was more about protecting the oil and timber barons than it was about drugs.
It was really a crime that it was ever made illegal.
State Senator Richard Young authored the bill that legalizes hemp production in Indiana. He says it could be the state's next cash crop, especially for southern Indiana, where it used to grow in the 1940s. But there's a catch.
It's depending on what happens with the federal level. We're not branching out and saying that, we're defying federal law.
Earlier this year, Congress did loosen the federal ban on hemp. As a part of the Farm Bill, universities and state departments of agriculture are now allowed to grow hemp if the industrial hemp is grown or cultivated for purposes of research conducted under an agricultural pilot program, and the growing or cultivating of industrial hemp is allowed under the laws of the state. So far, 9 states have laws allowing hemp production, and several more are considering legalizing it. Once more research is conducted, hemp advocates hope the federal government will legalize hemp production on a larger scale.
I think it's just a little bit slower moving on the federal level, just like everything else is. But in the meantime, states are taking the lead in preparing themselves so that as the Farm Bill is implemented by the USDA and as we move on with this, that they will be in a good place and be ready to implement those measures.
And there's the question of supply and demand. Hemp and hemp-based products such as textiles, lotions, and foods can be legally imported, so there is demand. But so far, that demand has remained fairly small.
So farmers are very cautious to grow it without a market. They need that guarantee and that assurance that there's going to be income and a contract in place. So without that, they're slow moving.
Back at his farm, Backus says if there ends up being enough demand, he'd like to try and grow hemp, even if it means he'll have to put up with routine inspections to make sure he's not growing marijuana.
Tobacco is a good crop from a gross income standpoint, not necessarily always a net income standpoint. So hemp may very well have a much lower income per acre, but with the basically being all automated, no hand labor, manual labor involved, then the net income could be something that's very beneficial, something that's enticing to us.
The hemp bill is heading to a conference committee to work out some issues before it's sent to the governor. And what's happening a lot right now is a lot of these bills. We turn now to State House reporter Brandon Smith for an update from the State House. A lot going on there this week as the session winds down. Brandon, we're going to put you in the hot seat here and just kind of run through a list of the biggest items this session and let you give us an update of where things are. Sound good? All right, topic number 1, pre-K first. Go.
Well, it seemed like the pre-K pilot was as good as dead as lately as last week in the Senate, but now Senate President Pro Tem David Long says there could be a compromise on the table that will give some sort of small pre-K pilot program, but it remains to be seen what will come of that.
Okay, the business personal property tax, its elimination was another topic from the governor this year.
The governor's not going to get full elimination. It looks like the House and Senate are moving towards making it a local option, letting locals decide whether or not to exempt the tax on certain new purchases. They're also looking at a super abatement, extending the current abatement from 10 to 20 or 25 years.
The Lifeline law, it was expanded.
Right. The original Lifeline law provided immunity from underage drinking charges for drunk minors who sought medical help for other drunk minors. The expansion of the law will provide that same immunity for drunk minors who seek police or medical help for anyone for any reason.
Criminal code, it passed last session, but lawmakers have been busy working out the details this session.
They're tinkering at this point, I would say, is the best way to describe it. They're working on making sure all of the sentence lengths are proper, making sure everybody is happy, from public defenders to judges to prosecutors. It's all about trying to drive more people away from the prisons and into local community corrections.
Okay, Brandon, how about drug testing for some welfare recipients?
That bill's really up in the air at this point. I can tell you that the House sponsor of the bill wasn't very happy with the changes made in the Senate, which significantly cut back on what the House passed. It would now only drug test welfare recipients who have previous drug convictions. They're still working on the details of how that will work in terms of the FSSA figuring out who needs to be tested.
Okay, how about the bill regulating physicians who perform abortions?
That's one that was largely made uncontroversial by the House. Planned Parenthood had a concern that the bill, which requires doctors who perform abortions or their backup physicians to have their, in writing, their admitting privileges at a local hospital in writing with the Department of Health, they were worried that would leave backup physicians open to harassment because those records would then be open to the public, but they're going to be redacted when they get to the Department of Health. So again, the House made that pretty non-controversial.
This was interesting too, a requirement for coaches to get concussion training.
Not just the significant part here is it isn't just high school football coaches, it's all youth football coaches, which would make Indiana the first state in the country to require football coaches at every level to receive concussion training. They think this can really go a long way towards curbing concussions among young football players.
Okay, and finally, gun possession in school parking lots.
This is a measure authored by Seymour Republican Representative Jim Lucas that would allow licensed gun owners to keep guns in their cars locked away on school property, so in the school parking lot. That was previously prohibited. Students would not be allowed to do that unless they're on a shooting team and have permission from the principal. Negotiations are going on right now between the House and Senate over what the final product of that bill will look like.
Great job, Brandon. Thank you so much, and we look forward to future reports.
Thank you, Joe.
In our Ask the Mayor segment, we travel the state and sit down with local officials to ask your questions and get answers about things that are affecting your life. This week I met with Sue Murray in Greencastle. Her city stands to lose 20% of its budget if the legislature eliminates the business personal property tax. I began by asking the mayor whether she thought eliminating the tax would create a better business climate and attract more businesses, thus negating the loss of the tax.
This is going to make a difference. I think many of us are skeptical and what kind of an impact that really is going to have on business development in areas. Is it going to make a difference between coming to Indiana and moving a business from here someplace else? I'm not really sure. And those are fairly small businesses we're talking about at that level. But it's a step to say, you know, we're going to take a little bit back. And I understand compromise, but again, it's with no replacement. And I think many of us are concerned that's just the first slip on a slope that has a pretty steep decline.
Ivy Tech has also been realigning throughout the state, and that's also happening here in Greencastle, moving the association from the Terre Haute branch to Indianapolis. Is that a good fit?
I think it is a good fit. I think Ivy Tech, as everyone knows, has done a lot of consolidating in order to try and bring their costs in line. I think we're going to see is really an emphasis from what they have told us and talked with us about advanced manufacturing and welding and back to an RN nursing program, doing things with logistics that we haven't been able to do. And I think we're going to see a greater cooperation between our Area 30 Career Center, our high schools, Ivy Tech, dual credits, and again, by working together, maximize the resources we all have for that common goal, which is a ready and able workforce.
And then how about those DePaul Tigers winning their conference championship and onto the NCAA, their 11th straight?
How about those Tigers? I had the privilege of watching them play in the finals last year and win the national championship. They're an exciting, dynamic group of young women. Chris Huffman, who has been their longtime coach and who has led them to such a wonderful, wonderful year this year and past years, is just an addition to our community, who is such a special person and brings a joy for our whole community to get involved with, to watch her young women play, and the success they've had, I think we all feel.
You can find our full conversation with Mayor Sue Murray online at WTIUnews.org. And while you're there, send us a question or tweet us at Ask the Mayor. Next week, we travel to Terre Haute to visit with Mayor Duke Bennett. And before we leave you, a look ahead to a special report we're bringing you next week on Indiana Newsdesk. It's part 1 of a series looking at the addictive power of heroin. We sit down with people who've lost everything: their families, their careers, their homes.
There's a lot of us who are just sick of it. It's a lot of work. People don't realize it. We're not just lying around all day like nodding out. It's like, it's a lot of hustle that goes into coming up with, you know, $75 to $250 a day to be functioning. It's a lot of lying, cheating, and stealing, and regular working, and yeah, a lot. It's not easy to maintain. It's a full-time job.
90% of recovering addicts relapse. We'll bring you a look at what's working in Indiana and what's not. And that's starting next week right here on Indiana Newsdesk. Looks very interesting.
It is very interesting, and he is a very talented and interesting man himself. I think it will be definitely worth it to see this story next week.
And we'll have to keep an eye on those DePaul Tigers as well.
Yes,
NCAA
so
tournament,
exciting.
Defending national champions. Everyone very excited there in Greencastle.
Yes, very exciting for that whole community.
All right, thanks, Alex, and thank you. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news in Southern Indiana throughout the week. It's all at WTIUnews.org. For all of us at WTIU, have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters, with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.